A quick disclaimer before we begin this Chapter 3 video. This chapter is very organic chemistry and biochemistry focused. Keep in mind that these are not my primary areas of study, and I will only be going as in-depth as the book goes for brevity and clarity purposes. So as we continue, please keep that in mind. Hello and welcome back to Biology for Beginners. As always, I am your host, Morgan. This week, we're going to be talking all about lipids. As always, before we dive into the meat of this episode, you have the opportunity now to pause the video and grab the terms and definitions that we will be using so that you are accustomed with the vocabulary today. Or you can pop on over to my Patreon and grab the PDF version of my PowerPoint for absolutely free and follow along. First off, before we get into the more complex components of lipids, let's start with the basics. Now, lipids are going to be hydrophobic, meaning they don't dissolve in water or they hate water. So as you can see in the image I have here, this is just a basic what you get when you try to mix an oil like olive oil into water. It just kind of separates, floats back to the surface. This is also why in the vinaigrette or oil and vinegar salad dressings, you get that separation of layers when they've sat and settled, because vinegar is highly a watery liquid and the oil in it doesn't mix with the water, so you get that separation. Lipids are also not technically polymers built from monomers, which is something that is unique to them when we're talking about the molecules that make biological life possible. They are also another molecule that can be used for energy storage, specifically in the form of fats, but we will get more into that later in this video. They're also important in signaling and regulating the biological functions within bodies. Specifically, steroids are used for this. And also, they're important in forming the base of the membranes that make up our cells and other biological membranes. Those are known as the phospholipids. So what exactly is a fat? Well, basically fats are just very large lipids that store energy. They're made up of a glycerol molecule linked to 3 fatty acids by a dehydration reaction. Also, when you're looking at nutrition labels, you might see the word triglyceride. That just means fat. Fats are triglyceride. Tri, 3, so 3 fatty acids, and then the glyceride is the glycerol linked to the fatty acids. Shown here, you can see I have the glycerol pointed to as well as the fatty acids linked to it, and on the far right is a depiction of that dehydration reaction that happens that then links that glycerol to the fatty acid chains. And basically the fatty acid chains, as you can see, are very long chains of the hydrocarbons linked together. So that's the basics of fats. Let's move on. There are going to be 2 important types of fatty acids to know, the saturated fatty acid and the unsaturated fatty acid. We're going to start with the saturated version. Now, if you notice here on the image I've cropped down the one from the previous screen to show a specific chain in this fatty acid talk. If you notice, all of the carbons linked together are linked together with single bonds from the top of that carbon backbone all the way down to the bottom. And this means that the chain is very, very straight, and it can pack very tightly together with other unsaturated fatty acid chains. The saturated part also means that it contains the maximum number of hydrogen atoms that can possibly link to all of those carbons in the chain. And a way to know if you're dealing with a saturated fatty acid is that it is solid at room temperature, like butter. Butter is probably one of the best examples of a saturated fatty acid because, again, it is very straight. All of those bonds between the carbons are single bonds. At room temperature, they do compact very tightly together, and they are saturated because they have the maximum number of hydrogens. So they are saturated with hydrogen. Now we move on to the unsaturated fatty acid. And as you can see in the image here on the left, it kind of has a bend in it at where I have circled in red. If you notice, that is a double bond between those two carbons. What that double bond does is it creates that kind of kink in the chain, and these unsaturated fatty acids cannot compact together as tightly as the saturated fatty acids can. And when you only have one double bond in your chain like that, that is a monounsaturated fatty acid. Any more than one, you will get a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And what this means, it has less than the maximum possible hydrogen atoms, so it's not saturated with hydrogen atoms. It also means that this particular fat will not be solid at room temperature. And unsaturated fatty acids are also known as the oils. So olive oil is going to be one of your unsaturated fatty acids. And in general, the more unsaturated a fatty acid is, the better fat it is. So it's the good fat versus the saturated bad fats. But it's a little more complicated than that when you get into how your body particularly breaks down fats. But we're not going to be getting into that really in this video. This is not about the metabolization of fats. This is just about fats in general. So the important thing here, unsaturated fatty acids have double bonds that make the chain a little bit kinky. When you're talking about fat, it is also important to talk about the trans fats and the health risks associated with fat. Now, trans fats come from the hydrogenation of unsaturated fats to get the hydrogenated oils that you see on the labels. What this does is it takes an unsaturated fatty acid and essentially turns it into a saturated fatty acid. So you get things like margarine, which is a vegetable-based alternative to butter, essentially. And it comes from vegetable oil that would usually be an oil, but by hydrogenating it, you get that margarine. Unfortunately, a common byproduct of this process is the trans fat, and trans fats are associated with an increased risk of heart disease. But that being said, I would like to point out that fat is not the enemy. Fat is an important way that your body does store energy, but you do have to be careful about the fats that you are eating, and it does take a little bit more effort for your body to then break down the fats because you have to first get through your carbohydrate stores. It's just that fat lasts longer than any stored carbohydrates in your muscles, which is why your body stores energy as fat. But this chart we have in the middle is directly from the textbook that I am following, and it just kind of depicts the different risk of heart disease based on the kind of fat you're consuming. And in general, the more unsaturated the fat is, the better it's going to be for your heart. So when you do eat fats, more of the unsaturated fats are going to be better for you, and avoid trans fats at all risk. And the natural saturated fats like butter kind of hang out somewhere in the neutral to just above neutral for heart risk zone. But still, olive oil over butter is probably going to be better for you. However, it is more nuanced than that. And I do encourage you, if you're trying to make diet decisions, do your own research and consult a healthcare provider before taking my advice. I am not a healthcare provider or a dietitian. Since we've gotten the fats out of the way, it's time to move on to the phospholipids. and they're more than just a big scary word. They are, however, very similar to fats in that they still have a glycerol molecule attached to a couple of fatty acids. However, instead of 3, one of those fatty acids has been popped off and replaced with a phosphate group, resulting in a molecule that has a hydrophilic head that is attracted to water and is a polar region on the molecule, and a hydrophobic tail that is repulsed by water and is a nonpolar region on the molecule. When you get a bunch of these together, the tails will be attracted to each other and the heads will then be on the outside of this kind of clump you get. What ends up happening overall is you get what is known as a phospholipid bilayer. And I'm sure you may have heard that term somewhere back in middle school learning about cells for the first time, because this makes up your cell membranes. We will get into more depth about the phospholipid bilayer and cell membranes in future videos, but it is important to see the molecule here and be able to know what it is, especially since we're talking about lipids now and their importance in the body. Now we're going to touch on the last lipid classification, the steroids. I'm sure you've all heard that word when referring to athletes that inject steroids to enhance their performance. And that is a thing that happens because they are based on the biological molecules that are produced to help you function. But the steroids that are injected by athletes are synthetic versions of what we are going to talk about now. The thing that makes steroids so unique and just different from the other lipids and other biological molecules that you tend to see is that their carbon skeleton is made up of 4 rings, and it's always 4 rings. However, the different steroids will have different chemical groups that are then attached to those rings. Some examples of these steroids that help control your body and make sure it's functioning properly are cholesterol, testosterone, and estrogen. Now, cholesterol specifically we have depicted here on the slide, and it is a common component of the animal cell membranes, and it is often a precursor for making other steroids, specifically the ones that are the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. And steroids have other functions as well. They're not always going to be hormones, but they are usually used in some sort of signaling, like the testosterone and the estrogen. But that is as in-depth as we're really going to get into steroids at this time. And I thank you for joining me on this week's journey into the world of biochemistry. I know that biochemistry is scary and a little bit torture, but luckily for you, your torture this week has come to a close. Again, I would like to remind you, if you would like the PDF version of my slides, they are available for free on my Patreon, linked down below. And I do hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, day, evening, what have you, and I will see you all later. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane B. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.